Hi everybody. This video is about the control of blood pH, how your body controls the pH of your blood. First, let's be clear about why your body bothers controlling blood pH. It's because you've seen a million of these figures, right? Which basically show us that enzymes only work within a narrow range of pH. All other proteins too. So if your body pH is too high or too low, everything goes wrong. Usually your nervous system first, because it so happens that regulation of acid in the body often involves the use of a acid-potassium antiporter. So changes in acid tend to produce a change in potassium, and as you may know, both resting membrane potential and action potentials depend on potassium. So for example, during acidosis in the body, cells become hard to excite, the person becomes confused and disoriented, whereas if the body is too alkaline, neurons become too easy to excite and the person experiences tingles, muscle twitches, and then more severe symptoms. Okay, so what determines blood pH? Well, it really all comes down to this equation. Remember that pH is a measure of acid protons. It's an inverse logarithmic measure of acid, but still a measure of one. And in fact, most of the acid in your body can be produced in a variety of ways, but most of it is produced by the carbon dioxide that you're making continuously in aerobic respiration. So aerobic respiration, constantly producing carbon dioxide, and that carbon dioxide is going to push this reaction to the right, producing acid. This reaction runs by the law of mass action, or Le Chatelier's principle. So we know that the more we accumulate on the left side of this equation, the more the reaction is going to be driven to the right. The enzyme carbonic anhydrase can catalyze the reaction in either direction. And so the more carbon dioxide we accumulate in the body, the more acid that we produce. Okay, so what we're going to focus on here is the acid. Bicarbonate is also going to be important, especially when we talk about the kidney, but in terms of what we're measuring, what blood pH is, it's just how much of this acid is in the body. Now the water here on the left side of the equation is essentially irrelevant, so I'm going to gray it out here, because your whole blood plasma is already water in solution, so the water part doesn't change. That's always going to be present. And you can't increase or decrease the sort of amount of water here. So that leaves two things that the body can change that most directly affect the pH of the blood: the carbon dioxide level and the bicarbonate. And each of those two things has an organ system that controls it. So there are two independent ways to control your blood pH. You can control carbon dioxide by changing your breathing rate and depth, and you can control bicarbonate and to some degree acid with the use of the kidneys. Let's start with breathing, because this is by far the most important organ system in controlling blood pH. Okay, so hopefully you know that the purpose of breathing is to get rid of carbon dioxide. Yes, of course, you also get oxygen by breathing, and of course that's also critical. But if getting oxygen were the only reason that you were breathing, you would only have to breathe about 6 to 8 times a minute, simply because air is so full of oxygen that it's quite easy to get enough into our lungs to drive movement of oxygen into the blood with the help of hemoglobin. So the faster you breathe, the more gas exchange occurs, because you're replenishing the amount of oxygen in the lungs and replenishing air that has a tiny amount of carbon dioxide in it into the lungs. And so you're maintaining these partial pressure gradients that allow these gases to move across the respiratory membrane. So basically, the faster you breathe, the more you're getting rid of carbon dioxide. Just think of it like, if the purpose of breathing is getting rid of carbon dioxide, the more breathing you do, the more carbon dioxide that you can get rid of. So for that reason, breathing rate is actually controlled by carbon dioxide and by the thing carbon dioxide turns into, which is acid, right? We saw earlier that as carbon dioxide accumulates, it's essentially converted by carbonic anhydrase into acid and bicarbonate. Okay, so if carbon dioxide accumulates in your blood, All right, so here it is in the top right of this picture here. It's going to bind to chemoreceptors, actually both peripherally and central, that is, in the central nervous system, chemoreceptors. As we know, that carbon dioxide also turns to acid, so the pH of the blood is going to go down as that carbon dioxide accumulates, and that's also detected by chemoreceptors. But in that case, those are in blood vessels because acid can't cross the blood-brain barrier very well. Okay, so those chemoreceptors detect the increase in carbon dioxide. They tell the medulla, which is that brainstem area that controls, among other things, breathing. And then neurons in the medulla, motor neurons in the medulla, simply tell the diaphragm muscle to contract. That's the diaphragm muscle that causes breathing. They tell it to contract more often. Okay, so the result is if your breathing rate goes up, that's going to pull this reaction to the left because you're removing one of the reactants on the left side of this equation, or decreasing one of the reactants on the left side of this equation. So if you remember Le Chatelier's principle, this reaction is going to go toward wherever there's less stuff, right? Fewer reactants. So if we remove carbon dioxide from the left side of this equation, then more acid is going to be converted to carbon dioxide. Essentially, acid and bicarbonate are going to combine and convert to carbon dioxide and water. So the acid level is going to decrease. Okay? In order to decrease acid, we need to pull this reaction to the left, and increased breathing is by far the most efficient and most effective way of doing that. Now, suppose your blood pH was too basic, that is, you didn't have enough acid in your blood, we needed more. In that case, we need to drive this reaction to the right. And to do that, we need more reactants on the left. Remember, we can't change the water part, so we need to accumulate more carbon dioxide. Accumulating more carbon dioxide is easy. Just hold your breath, and you'll accumulate some carbon dioxide. So by decreasing breathing rate, we decrease the amount of carbon dioxide that we're getting rid of through breathing. And as it accumulates then, this reaction is pushed to the right in the blood and restores the correct amount of acid in the body. So changing breathing rate in this way is by far the quickest way to make adjustments to blood pH, and it's the dominant way to make adjustments to blood pH. But it's not, in fact, the only way to change blood pH because sometimes it's not that effective. For example, if you had a really big pH problem, you couldn't completely fix it this way. Or if you had a disease like COPD, emphysema, a disease that prevented breathing from being effective and exchanging gases and getting rid of carbon dioxide specifically, then the solution really wouldn't work that well. In that case, we need the kidney, all right? And the way the kidney works is by now focusing on the right side of this equation. The kidney can't affect the amount of carbon dioxide in the body, not directly anyway, but it can affect the amount of acid and bicarbonate in the body. And the reason it can do this is because what the kidney does is it's constantly taking in a sample of all the blood in your body, the blood plasma in your body, not the cells. And then all the things that are dissolved in that blood plasma, the kidney can decide whether to put those solutes back into the blood, which is called reabsorption, or it can keep them in the kidney tubule itself, in which case they are destined to become urine. This is a much slower response. The kidney adding or returning acid and or bicarbonate to the blood or keeping them in urine is something that takes hours to really make a significant change in blood pH. Okay, so if you're going to have a pH problem in your blood, it's probably acidosis. There are many more common causes of acidosis than alkalosis. If you have acidosis in your blood, that's going to be addressed by these cells in the kidney called type A intercalated cells. Okay, so these blue cells are the type A intercalated cells, and they have two key transporters here. Okay, one of them, so the right side is the blood and the interstitial fluid that's next to it. And the left side is yellow. Just think of like yellow as urine, right? So this is not urine yet, but it's on its way. So anything that the kidney puts in this yellow compartment here, the collecting duct, is going to become urine if nothing else happens to it before the end of the collecting duct. Okay, so what we have here is in this intercalated cell, we have this reaction that we've been talking about, where carbon dioxide and water are converting to acid and bicarbonate. And then that acid is pumped, right? The ATP ACE transporter is pumped out into the lumen of the collecting duct. So essentially we're taking the acid in the body and removing it by putting it into the urine. Now that acid didn't enter those cells directly as acid because acid can't cross cell membranes very well. It crossed it, as you can see, as carbon dioxide, converted carbon dioxide, crossed into the cell, and then was converted back into acid and pumped out into the lumen of the collecting duct. Meanwhile, on the right side of the cell, facing the interstitial fluid and blood, we have bicarbonate, which is being reabsorbed. So reabsorb meaning put back into the interstitial fluid and blood, back into the body. And that bicarbonate then, we're adding bicarbonate to the right side of that equation, which is going to push that reaction to the left, removing the acid, and removing acid directly. So of course, the net effect is to raise the pH of the blood by getting rid of acid and buffering the remaining acid, pushing the reaction to the left. Now, if in fact your blood is alkaline and not acidic, then we have a parallel set of cells, these type B intercalated cells, which essentially have exactly the same transporters, or conceptually the same purpose of transporters, but they're on the opposite membranes, right? So now we still have acid being pumped out of the intercalated cells, but now it's being pumped out of the right side on our picture, that it's being pumped, that is, it's being pumped back into the blood. So if your blood is alkaline, we need more acid in it. And indeed, what these cells are doing is putting more acid back into the blood. Meanwhile, on the left side of these cells, the bicarbonate is being removed and put into the urine. So they're going to be less bicarbonate in the body, less bicarbonate buffering that acid that's going to pull that reaction to the right and produce more acid. So we're adding more acid back into the blood directly, and we're also triggering the production of more acid by removing that acid buffer bicarbonate from the blood. So when we return to thinking about it in terms of this reaction, the kidney can secrete or put into urine this acid, or it can put it back into the blood. And the same with bicarbonate, but it would do it in the opposite way, right? That if you had blood that needed more acid, as in the alkaline situation we were just talking about, we would want to put more acid back in the blood, but less bicarbonate, because we're trying to pull this reaction to the right. All right, now maybe that made sense to you, but to see if you really understand, you have to always test yourself. So suppose you had a panic attack and you were hyperventilating. Hyperventilating means that you're breathing both faster and deeper than normal, like this. Okay? So is that likely to cause acidosis or alkalosis of your blood? And how would the kidney respond in terms of reabsorption? And remember, reabsorption means putting bicarbonate back into the blood. So pause the video and decide what you think the answer is. Okay, so if you have a panic attack and you're hyperventilating, if you just look at the word hyperventilate, it's like elevated, hyper, much more, ventilate, breathe, so you're breathing more, and we already know that if you breathe more, you're getting rid of more carbon dioxide. So if you're getting rid of more carbon dioxide, you're pulling this reaction to the left, and the net result is that your blood is going to have less acid in it, and eventually it will have too little acid in it, that is, it will become alkaline. So alkalosis is the first part of the answer. And how will this affect bicarbonate reabsorption? Well, if we just go back to this picture of what happens during alkalosis, we can see on the right side here that if you don't have enough acid in your blood, the kidney will reabsorb more acid but less bicarbonate. The bicarbonate is going the other way. Okay, so alkalosis is the answer here, and the kidney will reabsorb less bicarbonate in order to let that acid be produced and accumulate in the blood. Okay, if you have questions about this, let me know.